My own family deceived me and stole everything. What I did next changed my life. Sometimes it takes us a while to realize we're trapped in a cycle that consumes us from within, and only when the breaking point is reached do we clearly see the extent of the damage. For a long time, I lived a life that from the outside seemed organized. I had a stable job, a certain respect from others, and that responsible man image everyone claimed to admire. But behind this facade, I was being sucked away. Little by little, almost without realizing it. It was as if each day was another part of me being taken away, and worst of all, not by strangers, but by the very people who should love and care for me. This contradiction of being exploited and at the same time accused of not doing enough was what blinded me for years. Only later did I realize it wasn't strength, but silence, submission. My name is Reginaldo, and today I tell this with a lump in my throat, but also with a peace I hadn't known before. This story happened a few years ago, at a time when I believed that being the pillar of the family was an obligation that ran in my blood. I worked at a bank, had a well-structured routine, and organized every penny that came in, believing that financial control was the key to security. But this organization became ammunition against me. My sister Sueli, her husband Clovis, and even my parents Neda and Ademar saw in me not someone to love, but someone to use. And because I was afraid of disappointing them, I allowed it. At first, it seemed small, an overdue electricity bill I paid to avoid fighting at my sister's house. A loan she promised to return but never did. I told myself it was normal, that this was what family was, that helping out didn't hurt. But these small concessions became routine. I was called not by my name, but by my role as a problem solver. It was as if the value of my presence was limited to the amount I could take from my wallet. And, for fear of being called ungrateful, I kept giving in. I convinced myself it was okay to sacrifice my plans, because after all, I was the strong one. But being strong like that wasn't a virtue. It was a prison. The pressure began to mount when I realized it was no longer about emergencies, but about a lifestyle at my expense. My brother-in-law Clovis never held down a job, always coming up with a new excuse. My sister Sueli racked up credit card debt as if the limit were made-up money. And my parents, instead of defending me, they reinforced, "You can help, Reginaldo. Don't be selfish." It was as if the entire responsibility of supporting other people's failures had been placed on me, and I accepted it. But every time I said yes, something inside me faded. I diminished myself, as if my life was always in the background, subordinate to their chaos. The hardest blow came one Sunday night, after a family lunch. I was tired, but still had that forced smile of someone pretending. Everything was fine. When I got home and checked my account, I realized something was wrong. Much of my money had simply disappeared. I discovered that somehow my password had been used without my authorization. When I confronted them, expecting at least shock or embarrassment, I received only mockery. "You have more than us. You needed more than us," Sueli said. And my parents, instead of supporting me, reinforced, "Family helps, Reginaldo. Don't be stingy." It was as if the floor had dropped beneath me. In that instant, I realized I had no family. I had parasites who saw me only as a source of income. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, my heart racing and my mind spinning in circles. It was as if all the effort of years had been spat in my face. I thought about every extra hour, every sacrifice I'd made, every plan I'd put off because there was a family emergency. And suddenly it all seemed ridiculous. I wasn't the dear brother, the devoted son. I was their ATM. It sunk in slowly like an incurable pain. The feeling of betrayal was so overwhelming I could barely breathe. It wasn't just the money they'd taken, it was the trust, the certainty that even in the midst of failure, there was still affection. In the following days, I tried to talk. I sat with my mother, hoping to find some sign of understanding, but I heard only excuses. Your sister has children. Her life is harder. When I spoke to my father, the response was curt. You've always been the strong one, hold on. And with that, the loneliness that had already plagued me grew. It was as if I was screaming in a room full of people and no one could hear me. I tried to understand when my life stopped being mine. How had I allowed it to get to this point? With each refusal of empathy, my desire to give up grew. I even considered dropping everything and disappearing. I wanted to disconnect from a pain that seemed to have no escape. There was a moment when I almost gave in completely. A close friend noticed my exhaustion and asked me, "How long are you going to let yourself bleed for them?" That hit me hard. It was a simple question, but it resonated deeply. How long? I didn't know how to answer. I was afraid of being judged, afraid of being labeled ungrateful. I had been trained to believe that love was synonymous with sacrifice, that saying no was a lack of character. But in that moment, something began to stir inside me, as if the pain, instead of just crushing me, was also pushing me out of the hole. The turning point came when, overcome by anger and exhaustion, I decided to seek help. I gathered all my bank statements and saved messages that proved how they had used my name to open credit and accumulate debts. For the first time, instead of hiding or swallowing the humiliation, I began to arm myself with evidence. It was a painful process because each document was a reminder of my fragility before them. But it was also liberating. I was finally facing the truth head-on, without disguise. With each piece of paper I gathered, I felt a spark of strength reborn. When I summoned the courage to file the complaint, my hands were shaking. On the way to the police station, I considered giving up several times. The weight of guilt still gnawed at me. What if I'm destroying my family? But at the same time, a voice inside me insisted, "And when have they ever worried about not destroying you?" That was the first time in years I chose to listen to myself. I handed over the documents, told my story, and in the end, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. Not joy, not euphoria. Just the inner silence of someone who had finally stopped running in circles. The days following the complaint were the most tense of my life. I imagined I would feel only relief, but the truth is, fear came along with it. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Sueli would call me crying, then screaming, then trying to negotiate. Clovis would send me threatening messages, telling me I would end up alone if I didn't withdraw the complaint. My parents arrived next with a rehearsed speech. "Family washes dirty laundry at home, Reginaldo. You overreacted." I listened to this with a mixture of anger and sadness. It was as if all the love I believed existed had been transformed into a weapon to manipulate me. The emotional blackmail was perhaps the cruelest part. My mother sent me long audio messages telling me I was ruining her health. My father kept and telling me I was ungrateful, that I had forgotten who raised me. At times, I almost gave in. The weight of guilt was immense, like a knot in my stomach. But for the first time, I had support. Close friends reminded me I wasn't wrong. "You're not destroying anything, you're saving yourself," one of them said. These words served as an anchor. I needed to hold on to them because alone I would probably backtrack. I also began to see myself differently in the mirror. Until then, I defined myself solely by my role as provider. Without it, I felt empty. But little by little, I realized there was more to me than that role. I had forgotten dreams, stifled desires. I began to rediscover small habits that did me good. Walking in the park after work, cooking something just for myself, turning off my phone without feeling guilty. They seemed simple, but they were acts of reconquest. Each of these gestures was a silent reminder that I had the right to exist beyond the demands of others. While the trial was underway, Sueli and Clovis tried to change the narrative. They spread the word to distant relatives that I was a monster, that I was interning my own parents in shame. Some family members believed it, others remained neutral. Kelly, Clovis's sister, sent me an unexpected message. "I know what you're going through. I always thought what they did to you was wrong." That was a breath of humanity. For the first time, someone on the other side recognized that I wasn't crazy or cruel. That small message had a huge impact. I wasn't completely alone. Still, there were nights when I cried in secret, feeling a huge void. No matter how right I'd made the decision, losing your family all at once is like tearing a piece of yourself out. It was a silent pain, one that doesn't heal overnight. But even though I cried, I wouldn't go back. Each tear was proof that I was breaking out of the cycle, no longer sinking into it. I repeated to myself, "This isn't selfishness, it's survival." And that phrase became my mantra, my line of defense against manipulation. After months of tension, the dust began to settle. The process was moving along smoothly, and I was no longer so alarmed by every message or call. Little by little, silence replaced the constant drumbeat of demands. This silence at first bothered me. It was strange to have no one asking for anything, no urgent problem to solve. It felt like my life had lost its purpose. But as the days passed, I realized that what I felt wasn't missing my family, it was withdrawal from an addiction. The addiction of always being responsible for everyone. I was learning to live without this prison. Financially, the situation was still dire. I had lost a lot of money, and rebuilding my security wasn't easy. But for the first time, I had real control over my choices. I restructured my budget, cut expenses that weren't mine, and started investing in small things that brought me joy. I traded the feeling of putting out fires for that of planting seeds. It wasn't wealth, but it was freedom. Each bill paid with my own effort, free of inherited debt, was a silent victory. It was as if I were cleansing not only my bank statement, but also my soul. Emotionally, the battle was harder. The weight of loneliness crushed me some days. I saw families reunited, siblings laughing together, and I wondered if I had done the right thing. Guilt still loomed large, but in those moments I remembered my friend's words. "You didn't destroy anything, you saved yourself." This phrase became almost a prayer for me. Little by little, I learned to transform solitude into a space for self-discovery. In place of emptiness, I began to build a new territory within myself, where I could breathe without fear of pressure. It was during this period that I returned to hobbies I'd abandoned years ago. I picked up the guitar that had been sitting on the shelf, started drawing again, and started hiking on the weekends. Small things that rekindled the feeling that I was more than a provider. It was as if I was relearning to see myself as an individual, not a function. Every note played, every step on the trail, every sketch drawn in a notebook was a victory against the image they tried to impose on me, that I was only valuable if I was serving others. In the midst of this process, I understood that true overcoming wasn't just reporting my family or recovering the lost money. The greatest victory was freeing myself from the belief that love is measured by sacrifice. I learned that saying no is also a form of love, but this time to myself. Today, when I look back, I'm proud not only of the courage I had, but of my ability to carry on despite the pain. Because overcoming isn't about erasing the wound. It's about learning to live with the scar without letting it define who you are. Over time, I realized that my life had been reorganized in layers I hadn't even imagined. I still missed family ties, but not the weight they brought. The pain of loss was replaced by an awareness of my worth. I felt lighter, more whole, more human. I began investing in relationships that truly mattered, friends, colleagues, people who saw me not as a source, but as companionship. This change brought a sense of belonging I had never experienced before. For the first time, I was no longer afraid to be who I am, and that was liberating. At work, my dedication continued, but in a different way. Before, Each achievement was just another reason for me to be asked more at home. Now, my effort had its own purpose. I learned to set goals that didn't depend on anyone else, to feel proud of what I was building for myself. Every positive result at the bank, every recognition from colleagues, every small financial advancement was a reminder that I could trust myself. For the first time, I was my own emotional and financial provider. My relationship with my parents and sister changed completely, but not in the way they imagined. There was no forced reconciliation, no return, just silence, firm boundaries, and my own peace. I understood that love doesn't mean accepting abuse. Accepting it would be a betrayal of myself, and in a way, this distance brought clarity. I didn't need their approval to validate my existence. I learned that some bonds, no matter how familiar, can be set aside without guilt when they destroy more than they build. Today, when I share my story, I see that many people can relate. This gives me the strength to keep telling it, to inspire those who feel trapped in abusive relationships, whether family, romantic, or professional. I want them to know that it's possible to put an end to it, that it's possible to rebuild your life even when it seems everyone is against you. My life isn't perfect again, but it's mine again. Every step I took, every tear I shed, every fear I faced became fuel for my freedom. I know there are still moments of pain, memories that haunt me, and questions that will never be answered. But now, I face them differently, with courage, determination, and self-love. Today, I know that saying no doesn't diminish the love I feel. It simply redefines my limits. Life has taught me that overcoming is not a permanent state, but a daily process. And even with all the scars, I hold my head high, certain that no matter how difficult it may be, we can always reconnect with ourselves and find peace. I did it, and I know others can too.